I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. We have the distinct honor of hosting a leader whose popularity and influence have been nothing short of remarkable. Governor Wes Moore has emerged as a prominent and influential figure, not just within the Democratic Party, but also across the political spectrum. His leadership has been characterized by a commitment to justice and pragmatic governance that transcends typical partisan boundaries. Governor Moore has tirelessly championed juvenile justice reform, ensuring that our youth are given the opportunity to rehabilitate and reintegrate into society, which is so important. His efforts have been pivotal in reshaping the juvenile justice system, especially in his state of Maryland, emphasizing both accountability and compassion. And even in a time where physical policies often burden the middle class, our guest tonight has stood firm against imposing new taxes on hard-working Marylanders. His stance on economic issues reflect a deep understanding of the challenges faced by everyday citizens and a dedication to alleviating their financial pressures. Governor Moore has taken some bold and sometimes contentious positions on immigration, navigating the complex issues with a balance of empathy and pragmatism, and his approach demonstrates and set an example of a person who has a willingness to engage with difficult topics head on. And we welcome him tonight in our studio. Governor, welcome to the broadcast.
Great to see you, sir.
You know, obviously, you have emerged as the person that the White House looks to as Mr. Biden still reels from his debate, and you've stood firm with the president. In fact, they say you are his top surrogate. Now, as an owner of the Baltimore Sun, it's fascinating because we continue to receive letters to the editors from readers who say they really respect you, they're behind you, but they find it fascinating that you could support a president that they feel whose fitness to office, and you continue to rally to his defense as suspect as reports continue to come out that note where the president continues to decline cognitively. How do you respond to that?
I deeply respect what people are saying, and I understand that the president has got to make his case. He's got to make his case to the American people. My support of the president is unwavering, and it's from two different perspectives. One is he's the person that won the primary. He's the nominee. He's the person who millions of people have voted for, and so I always will stand with the people. And he's the person who is the Democratic nominee. The second piece is I have seen him in action. You know, I'm an old Army guy, and I know that I learned something in the Army where they said you don't learn anything about anybody in times of ease. In easy times, anyone can show me anything they want to show me. Anything you ever need to learn about somebody, watch them when times are tough. Watch them when the heat gets turned up. And I watched him when the Key Bridge collapsed. I watched him as my first phone call from the White House came at 3:30 in the morning. I watched as the president gave a press conference at noon that day where he said to the world, we are standing with Baltimore and we're going to be with them every step of the way, and he has been. And so I'm standing with the president because I believe in democracy. I believe the people have spoken, and I'm standing with the president because when we were knocked down as a state, when 13% of our economy was shut down, when tens of thousands of people were hours away from waking up and realizing that they didn't have a job, he stood with us. And I'm never going to forget that, and I don't do disloyalty. And so that's why I stand firmly with the president.
You know, you are different from most Democratic governors. You know, when you first came to office, people were saying you were progressive, you were liberal, and yet you stood firm on juvenile justice, and it was passed despite protests and upsetting your own base. Now you're confronted with the issue of taxes in the state of Maryland. And while some say that you're adamant about not raising taxes. You can tax people in other ways.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't come from a political background. I don't come from a political family. I think part of the reason that people appreciate the work that we're doing is I'm not a politician in that way, where you just kind of put your finger in the air and figure where things go. I think people in these positions, they have to lead. And so, yes, we're proud of the fact that we've been able to now go 2 straight years passing a bipartisan balanced budget with both Democrat and Republican supports. I'm proud of the fact we've been able to get 2 years done where we now did not raise sales taxes. We didn't raise personal income taxes. We didn't raise corporate income taxes. We did not raise state property taxes. And we still were able to make historic investments in making things cheaper for the people of our state, like health care and like childcare, making the large investments in childcare, because I think we've shown that being fiscally responsible and also making big investments in your state's future don't have to be mutually exclusive ideas as long as you follow the data. But the thing that I also know is this, and even when you look at what's happened with where we've had certain user fees that have been raised, and I do want to be clear on something. I do love how, you know, some of these same folks who passed the budget, because let's be clear, the Maryland budget was passed with unanimous support from Republican senators, right? They passed this budget. And now, despite passing this budget, they then criticize, which is the thing that people hate about politics, which is the thing I hate about politics. You know, that people don't like the gamesmanship. People don't like the fact that you're going to sit there and point fingers at a political party without any factual basis. So you had a budget that we worked on together, Democrats and Republicans, that we got passed with Republican support in both the House and the Senate, unanimous support with House Republicans and with Senate Republicans, and that was able to do the big things, but then turn around and criticize us for the user fees.
But is there a looming state deficit? Will you actually raise taxes, raise fees, or cut government?
No, I think we have shown that we could actually be bold and address these issues and still be fiscally responsible. And let's be clear on some of these user fees we're talking about. We're talking about things like having a fee on people who have multiple handgun licenses. That there was a user fee increase for that because, yes, that went towards things like shock trauma, because they're the ones who were dealing with gunshot wounds. That there was a user fee for people who violate speeding in work zone safety areas. But that's the thing, if you're not speeding in a work zone safety area, that's not going to impact you. You know, we're talking about user fees that are not going to impact the majority of Marylanders, but we are talking about things that are going to help support and make things cheaper for the majority of Marylanders. And so, yes, when we talk about what we're going to be able to do, we've got to address the fact that if you look at the 8 years prior to us taking office, for the 8 years prior under my predecessor, under the old governor, you watch how the state budget continued to increase every single year.
So let me inject here, because that's fascinating. You know, by next year, the state's projected structural budget deficit grows to $1 billion. I mean, in fiscal 2027, the last year of your term, it's going to grow to $1.3 billion. And even a year later, it more than doubles to $3 billion. About 12% of the general fund revenues projected for that year. And even a study in the Journal of Urban Economics found that the Baltimore, that is how do you make up for that deficit and who pays for it?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. It's also not new. They've said that this was the case since 2018. And since 2018, you know what has grown? The budget. Mm-hmm. Do you know what has not grown? GDP. That's the problem, that we continue to have a budget that continues to grow. In 2022, or the year before we took office, the budget grew by 34%. 34%. And the GDP essentially stayed flat. That's the problem. And so there's going to be a couple ways. First of all, you have to grow your way out of it. You're not going to tax your way out of that problem. That does not work. You've got to be able to make proper investments. You've got to be able to grow the economy. And yes, you have to actually look at the things you're spending on and say the things that are working, you spend on that. The things that are not working, stop spending on it. But we have a spending problem that has to be addressed, and we have to be able to focus on growth. If we can do both of those two things simultaneously, as we have done, I'm going to say, our first 2 years in office are the first 2 years in over a decade that actually the budget for the state has decreased.
So let me raise this. There's a study in the Journal of Urban Economics found the Baltimore metro system operates at a negative net social benefit of minus $177 million. I mean, if the net financial benefit, let's say, of the metro system, Governor, is already millions in the red, why does it make financial sense to expand it?
Well, it makes financial sense, and so I would actually push back on the data to say when we're looking at the ability to move people from where they live to where they work, I would actually argue that the greatest detriment that you could have is having a system where people can't get to work. Having a system where people live in a certain jurisdiction and they cannot get to where employment is, where they cannot get to where economic opportunity lies. The reason that
even if you take a loss.
No, but that's the thing. If you look at the economic benefit of actually getting people involved in the economy, look at what's happening right now for the state of Maryland, where when I was first inaugurated, we were 43rd in unemployment. Now for the 12th straight month, and I just got the numbers, I look at these numbers all the time. For the 12th straight month, we now have amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. We're now finally starting to see where labor participation is actually starting to uptick.
And you also have a state with some of the highest salaries.
Correct.
In the state. So let me go to your the rail legislation that you're pushing before we go to break.
Yeah.
Late last year, the Baltimore Light Rail shut down unexpectedly over mechanical issues. That came as a shock to the entire region.
That's right.
Why would we turn to the same technology for the Red Line if a subway line or some other mode of transportation could be more reliable?
It's not the same technology.
It's not.
No, that's the difference, is that when you're looking at what you have antiquated technology that has been on board. What we're talking about now is actually creating a reliable, a sensible, and a financially prudent, financially smart way of being able to move people from where they live to where they work, where they live to where they go to school, and getting it done on time and on budget. The kind of breakdowns that we are seeing, that's not normal for mass transit technology. You don't find that in other places that have reliable mass transit options. What we're talking about doing is building true measurements of transportation mobility, because you cannot have economic mobility if you don't have physical mobility, but it means you have to have transportation assets that are reliable and that can do it in an efficient manner.
Governor Westmore is our guest. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. You know, what is fascinating about the conversation about the light rail system and these subways is that many businesses, and there are certain people who believe that when you open up the transport to these different communities, because people wonder right here in Washington, D.C., why you don't have the subway going to Georgetown, because people feel you're transporting criminals. You're transporting juveniles that's going to be very disruptive and debilitating to businesses.
Yeah, I hear that argument. I hear what people are saying. The thing that I would just say is the data doesn't reinforce that. You know, no one makes that argument when you look at the subway system in New York, or the rail system in London, or in Hong Kong. You know, you have to be able to move people to where opportunity lies. When I remember 2 years ago, I did an experiment. I said, listen, if I was living in West Baltimore, and I got a job over at Fells Point, and I said, let me see, and let's say I was working the midnight shift. Let me see how long it would take for me to be able to get from where I lived in West Baltimore and over right by Mondawmin and to get to my job at Fells Point. Do you know how long it took me to be able to do that if I was working the midnight shift? Over an hour and a half. I could have walked there faster. There is something fundamentally unfair when you have economic growth and opportunities in certain areas and people cannot get to them. And that's how we create these pockets of poverty, long-term generational poverty that then exists. And so when people are saying that this is about transporting, bad behavior, my argument is, well, if you look at places like what happens in London or New York or in Hong Kong, that's not the arguments that are being made there. You've got to be able to move people to where economic opportunity lives.
You've spoken repeatedly about the physical headwinds Maryland faces and the need for fiscal discipline in how we draft our budgets. How did Maryland get there, and how do you strengthen Maryland's economy in the long run?
There's been a lack of discipline and a lack of intentionality. And it's been like this for a period of time where if you think about just take the 8 years before I came on board, where we watched our budget continue to grow every single year under my predecessor. Every single year, the budget grew, sometimes by 5%, sometimes by 7%. I mentioned 2022 by 34%. That's how large the budget grew. But we were not intentional about what we were going to invest in, so we had economic growth that essentially stayed flat. Over that period of time, over the 8 years, Maryland's GDP grew by 3%. The average state in the country grew by 11%. And so all the economic prowess that people talk about, that was all masked, because that was all COVID money. That was all federal money that came in, one-time usage of federal money. That was not long-term sustainable economic growth. And so we knew that we had to come in, that we were going to be fiscally disciplined, that again, I come from the business world. I'm new to politics, but I'm not new to balance sheets. That we were going to be fiscally disciplined. We were going to invest in the things that actually we knew that Maryland had a unique, distinguished advantage of to be able to create measurements of economic growth. Things like cyber and things like AI and things like defense tech. That we were going to get more people into the workforce. And that's why we focused on things like making sure that you didn't necessarily have a college degree in order to be economically successful.
I just had an epiphany. There's so much chatter about you and whether you're going to be a vice presidential candidate or presidential candidate in 2024. And what I just realized in your passion and your grasp of understanding Maryland is that you're not leaving. You're not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere.
It's obvious. You have no ambition.
I love this job. I love this state. I love the direction the state is on. We have now one of the lowest, we have one of the fastest drops in unemployment in the entire country. We have some of the fastest drops in violent crime and homicides in the entire country. We are watching Maryland doing things like becoming the first state in the country that has a service year option for all of our high school graduates. Maryland's now the first state in the country that actually is making a place-based, data-driven, place-based investment strategy to be able to deal with things like concentrated generational child poverty.
So how do you respond to what happened back in May when the ratings agency Moody's put Maryland on a negative watch with respect to the AAA bond rating? And why were Marylanders placed on a negative watch? And what does that mean for the future of your state?
Well, I think about what that meant. Well, first of all, Maryland kept its AAA bond rating with all the rating agencies. And by the way, we're one of only a handful of states that still has AAA bond ratings across the board. One of only a handful of states. But if you look at the reasons why that happened, one is we can't discount the fact that the United States was put under a negative watch, right? So it wasn't just about Maryland. The country was put under negative watch. And a lot of that's because of the political nonsense that's going on and inability to get things done. You looked at the fact that 2 weeks before they showed up for their meetings with us, 13% of our economy was shut down. And so there was very real concerns about what was the impact of the Key Bridge and how long would that federal channel be reopened. When they were here, all the narrative was this could take up to 11 months to get that federal channel reopened. We got it done in 11 weeks. And the third piece is the same long-term fiscal challenges and headwinds that they were speaking about, we've been speaking about since we were inaugurated, because the state's been talking about it since 2018 and hasn't worked on it. And so these are all things that we knew we had to focus on. That while we can't address what happens with on the national side with the national negative watch, we can address the fact that we can get that federal channel reopened and faster than anyone thought possible.
So you're staying. You're going to remain as governor. You're not going anywhere.
I love this job. I think the people of the state think we're doing a pretty good job, and now I'm gonna keep on doing this job.
You know, you were talking about some of your priorities. I remember a major speech you gave in Ocean City, and you said that your administration would begin prioritizing child care, health care, education, and housing. Could you please outline the thinking that went into this decision?
Because these are all things that create economic growth. We need more people involved in the economy. I need more participants in our economy. And so to do things like driving down the unemployment rate and increasing the labor participation rate, it meant that you needed to do things to get more people involved in the economy. And that meant things like creating better pathways, making sure that we're focusing on apprenticeship programs and trade programs, making sure that we made historic investments in childcare. Because do you know who childcare most impacts? It's parents and particularly women. And if you want to get women back into the workforce, invest in childcare. And that's exactly what we did. That we had to do a better job of increasing wages and making sure that people were getting a fair wage for the work that they were doing. You had to make sure you were investing in healthcare. And it's the reason why we are proud to be a national leader in things like Medicaid re-enrollment. Because people need to be healthy in order for them to be economically viable.
So, you know, Rachel Morin, we all know that story. Should the state have a unified ICE policy?
My heart broke for Rachel, and my heart is still broken for Rachel, and it's broken for her mom, most importantly, who I've had the honor of speaking to about this. And I can tell you right now, we don't tolerate violence in our state, ever. And I don't care the status of the person who's involved in it. You break the law in the state of Maryland, there will be accountability, there will be consequences.
But does that translate to you, which only you can do, through an executive order, through the legislature, having a uniform policy across the state where Hartford, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, all adhere to the same policy?
Well, to be clear, ICE is a federal agency.
Yeah, we understand
right?
that.
So, and the federal agency, they have laws in terms of the local jurisdictions being able to correlate. So the relationship between ICE and states is really a relationship between ICE and towns and cities.
Yeah,
it's
but
not with the
Hartford
state.
County does not, enforces it differently than Baltimore County.
No, but Hartford County, this is federal law that these local jurisdictions have to account for. And we are making sure that these local jurisdictions are accounting for federal law. There is no state law that you can do for ICE. ICE is a federal policy because they are a federal agency. And they have rules and they have guidelines and demands that they have for local jurisdictions, and the local jurisdictions need to follow the federal policy. But I'm telling you, the idea that somehow the state has an ICE policy, there's nowhere that a state has an ICE policy. And frankly, for anyone who's talking about what should the state do, you know, I tell people they're either politically motivated or they're just deeply uninformed.
But we do continue, Governor, to learn about illegal migrants with violent criminal records, rape, assault, roaming the streets of Maryland. But some local jurisdictions just, I mean, let's face it, they refuse to work with the federal government that you speak about.
They're violating federal law.
And they shouldn't violate federal.
They are violating federal law. Now, we also do need to make sure, though, that we have federal law and federal immigration policy that's doing a better job of being able to create a sensible and sustained immigration policy. That there is no governor is in charge of immigration policy. The governors are pay the consequences of a broken immigration system, whether they are a governor of a red state or a blue state. I work with all my governors all the time, and we talk about this all the time. We deal with the consequences of the fact that there is a broken federal immigration system. Now, and I do want to also be clear, though, you know, this isn't about immigration or immigrants. I come from an immigrant family.
This is about criminals.
This is about people who break the
Their
law.
behavior, yes.
This is about people who break the law.
You know, what is fascinating, and I don't know if you're the state gets enough credit for this, is that this year, Baltimore City saw the sharpest one-year decline in homicides in almost nearly a decade. Yeah. What kind of policies, Governor Moore, help contribute to this change that other states across the country can learn from? And what more do we have to do to keep Marylanders and our nation safe?
We started working together. Partnership produces progress. When we first came on board, we knew that we had a major issue when it came to violent crime, where for 8 straight years, Baltimore had 300 plus homicides. For over an 8-year period, the homicide rate in the state of Maryland nearly doubled. The non-fatal shooting rate did double in the state of Maryland. And I was very clear. I refuse to be a governor that just sits there and attends funerals and offers thoughts and prayers and demands that other people do things without us being able to do things ourselves. So when we came on board, we made historic investments in our state's attorneys, historic investments in our U.S. attorney. Maryland's now one of the only states in the country that actually uses our balance sheet to be able to help support the U.S. attorney, because we had to turn some of these crimes into federal. And some of these people need to understand you're going to do Fed time for the work that you're doing and getting these trigger pullers off of the street. That we made historic investments in what we call MCAC, the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, which is the governor's main intelligence collection tool that all the jurisdictions are now communicating to include Baltimore City, which until I came on board was not included in MCAC. That we did more to be able to support community organizations and community violence interruption programs. And we started actually working together with local jurisdictions and our federal partners. And the results have been staggering, where not only have we seen some of the sharpest drops in homicides and violent crimes anywhere in the country, Baltimore City, to your point, the last time the homicide rate was this low in Baltimore City, I was not born yet. That's the job.
Not born yet. Hold that part. We're honored to have the most popular governor in the nation, according to polls and reports, Governor Wes Moore, joining us tonight and live in our studios. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future, and we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, Governor, as I listen to you, you can actually see your evolution into your role as governor. I'm just curious, what guides your philosophy? What guides your conclusions? Because you're neither progressive, nor liberal, nor conservative. You just can't place you in a box. What has changed?
You know,
because let's be clear. I mean, in the beginning, we remember when you let Chaudhry go. That was a big decision. You brought in a superintendent now.
She's
You're beginning to see the change. We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
You took a strong position with juvenile justice, which shocked many people. Even your own base of progressives were upset with you. So what has changed? What guides you now?
You know, I don't know if I have changed. I think people have understood that I meant what I said. You know, when I said that I'm data driven, I don't move without data. You got to show me data that something actually works. I don't do political ideology. I do data. And I think people see that, you know, that when we said leave no one behind, that wasn't just that's not a slogan. It literally is a governance philosophy. It's how I think about the world. It's what the military taught me when I was 17 years old. And I remember when I was leading soldiers, I always say, you know, a question I never once asked my soldiers: what's your political party? I've never given into that stuff. And so the way we've approached a multitude of different issues, whether it be education, whether it be economic growth and economic development, whether it be healthcare and health supports, whether it be the way we deal with public safety, I need to understand what the data is telling me. And I need to understand, are we doing something that's not leaving people behind? Because if we can do that, I truly believe we get to a better conclusion.
You know, you work with the Maryland General Assembly to pass legislation to help fill the hiring gap in law enforcement jobs. How does this legislation, Governor, fit into your broader vision to make Marylanders safer? And do you believe it goes far enough?
Yes, and you know, I'm really proud of this piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation that we introduced and that we passed and got passed bipartisan. Was what we call the GAPS Act, which is really about how we're creating a better pipeline for law enforcement officers to be able to enter into the profession. Because we really had a twofold issue. One issue was there were just shortages that we saw all across the board when it came to law enforcement. And that is something that there's been an atrophy for a long period of time. And I said very clearly when I was coming on board, we support law enforcement. We support the people who raise their hands to serve. And we are going to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to make sure they and their families feel supported. The second thing that we have to do is the best way to recruit is to do a better job retaining, right? Because people don't join an organization where the people who are there are treated bad. That's not the way you fix this thing. You've got to do a better job of retaining folks. And so with the GAPS Act, it's the most aggressive piece of legislation passed bipartisan that this state has seen in recent history that focuses on rebuilding the pipeline for law enforcement officers. You need to make sure that you had people in these seats. You need people who are there to be able to respond to our communities. And I believe deeply that you can create a law enforcement unit that moves with absolute integrity and full accountability and full transparency and full supports. And you don't have to choose between those things.
You know, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse was one of the biggest tragedies in recent Maryland history. And could you just talk about what the process was like to respond to that crisis and what work lies ahead?
I'll never forget that morning. I know my phone rang at 2:02 in the morning. And where our chief of staff, who let me know that at that point that the iconic Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore was now gone. A bridge that close to 40,000 people relied on to get to work every day. A bridge that supported a port of Baltimore that was 13% of Maryland's economy. That tens of thousands of port workers were about to wake up and realize they didn't have a job to go to. And there were 6 Marylanders who were unaccounted for. And immediately we began mobilizing assets, getting Maryland State Police divers in the water, looking to save lives. Maryland Transportation Authority police, who did an amazing job of keeping cars off that bridge, and they saved countless lives that night. Being able to get aerial assets in the air so they can shine light so people knew what was going on. And I remember that first morning, I had 4 directives for the people of our state. We were going to give closure and comfort to these families of these 6 individuals who lost their lives that day. We were going to make sure that we could support the people who were directly impacted. That included the port workers and the first responders. We were going to make sure that we could reopen that federal channel because the Port of Baltimore is too important, not just to Maryland, but too important to this country. 2/3 of the country gets their supplies and goods from the Port of Baltimore. And we are going to get this Francis Scott Key Bridge rebuilt. And I'm proud to say that, you know, we're standing here now with 3 of the objectives accomplished. that we were able to recover the bodies of the 6 individuals and return them to their families to give them the closure that they needed. We were able to, when people were worried about the unemployment rate in Maryland, and people said, I wonder what the unemployment rate in Maryland is going to be for the month of April. The answer is that we, in addition to having one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country once again, we actually gained 7,000 jobs in the month of April. And we got that Port of Baltimore reopened faster than anyone thought imaginable. But the mission is not complete until we get the Francis Scott Key Bridge rebuilt.
Obviously, you made global headlines recently when you pardoned 175,000 cannabis convictions. What led you to make that decision, and what kind of effect will this move have on the state of Maryland?
This move was simply about fairness, and it was about economic growth. And I'll explain. In the last election, I ended up winning with 65% of the vote, right? The only thing that beat me was cannabis, because it was a referendum. It won with 70% of the vote. So 70% of the state of Maryland said...
The people spoke.
The people spoke overwhelmingly that they wanted a recreational cannabis market. And we have been in the process now of rolling out not just the most effective, but frankly the most equitable cannabis market in the country. I just announced that Maryland has had over $1.1 billion of sales in cannabis over the process of the past year. So we now have a new billion-dollar market. And at the same time, you have people who have records that are keeping them from getting small business loans, keeping them from getting barber's licenses, keeping them from getting government contracts. And so I just basically said, you cannot celebrate the benefits of legalization if you do not wrestle with the consequences of criminalization. And so that mass pardon, which is the largest mass pardon in the history of the United States, 175 cannabis convictions in the stroke of a pen, made history. But it was about how are you adding a degree of fairness into the fact that we have a new burgeoning market and people who are still getting punished for something that is now legal. And also, I need them part of the economy. I need them working. I need them being taxpayers.
Let me add to that, because you said that one of your biggest priorities as governor is to narrow the 8-to-1 racial wealth gap.
That's right.
In your state. Update us on the progress you've been able to make so far and the additional plans that you plan to make.
We have been focusing on this, and there's a reason why, is that the racial wealth gap doesn't impact a group. It's impacting all of us. Citigroup released a report showing that the racial wealth gap has cost this nation $16 trillion in GDP over the past 2 decades. That's not GDP of a group. That's not gross domestic product for a group. That's GDP. So we have to be able to close the racial wealth gap if you want to increase economic opportunity for the nation and for our state as a whole. And so we've been very clear and deliberate that we're focusing on things like procurement reform and making sure that we're having additional pathways for minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses to be able to get a fair procurement policy and get a fair amount of government contracts. That we've been able to do things like raise wages, because we know that gone should be the days when you have individuals who are working jobs, and in some cases multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line. That we've been able to do things like increasing access to home ownership, because I want an ownership society. And so we've made it easier for first-time home buyers to be able to get homes. We've made it easier for people to be able to do development in with transit-oriented development and density bonuses for developers that are building in areas, because there are certain places in the state where we shouldn't build. But the places where we should build, we need to build and create more access to home ownership and making people owners of their own destiny. If you can do that, you're not just going to address the racial wealth gap in theory, but you're actually increasing GDP and economic growth as a whole. And so I'm proud of the fact that the state of Maryland, we've been clear. I want the state of Maryland to be the first state that can actually erase a racial wealth gap. And we're well on our way because we're putting together policies that can actually create an ownership society. I want people to own more than they owe.
It's interesting because you've declared 2024 the year for the military families in Maryland. What does that mean? And does this mean you are more focused on military families than you are on veterans?
Oh, no, we're focusing on military families because we are focused on veterans. You know, I'm a military veteran myself. I was a paratrooper. I led soldiers in combat in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division. Do you know one of the biggest takeaways I took from that is I used to think that soldiers had it toughest. We didn't. We had good days, we had some really bad days, but we always had each other. It's the families in many ways who had it toughest. And if you want to take care of vets, make sure our families are good. And that's why we declared 2024 the year of the military family. That's why we introduced legislation that did things like giving supports for military spouses, because oftentimes the military spouses, when people look at their resume, it looks like they can't hold a job because they only have jobs for 18 months at a time. That's not because they can't hold a job, it's because they keep moving. And so it's helping employers to better understand the skill sets that these military spouses bring when they come on board. It was doing things like for people who are serving as both as state employees and as members of our National Guard, and saying we're going to increase the amount of PTO, paid time off, leave that they have, because you had people who were burning their PTO to do military service. That should never be the case, that someone is almost getting punished with their PTO because they're choosing to defend our state and our nation. That we did things like making Maryland the first state in the country that now has a pathway for free dental care and health care, because I refuse to have a state where someone is having our country's flag on their shoulder and they do not have dental care. It's things like that that we said are not just common sense, but have really made Maryland a national leader when it comes to support for our military, support for our veterans, and support for the most important things in veterans' lives, our family members.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore is our guest. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, it's fascinating, you and I sitting here in this hour discussion where people can really flesh out issues, and you talk about you don't care about anyone's political persuasion, and it's obvious you don't see platforms like this as conservative. Whatever, you see an opportunity to tell your story, talk about your leadership as governor in Maryland. You know, there's a very important role between the fourth estate, which is the media, and leaders like yourself, because I do believe if we have forums like this where we're not trying to malign each other, but we hear each other, I think we are part of what can heal a nation.
Yes, and it's what the nation needs right now. I think that we have gotten to a point where you have people who care more about where the idea came from than is it a good idea. And it's dangerous. It's one of the reasons why, you know, making Maryland the first state in the country that has a service year option for all of our high school graduates was so important. You know, it was great in terms of workforce training. It was great in terms of experiential learning. It was great because it gives them an earned financial cushion. But also one of the reasons why it was really great was this, is that service will save us. And service is sticky. And for these young people who are signing up to be able to be part of the service year option, they now have a chance to have a paid year of service in whatever area they want to do it in, where they'll receive payment, receive a $15 minimum wage for all these new high school graduates, get a $6,000 stipend at the end of it, getting job training and building a cohort and building a network of people who they will keep with for the rest of their lives. Service is sticky, and service is going to save us.
It also brings me to that. Back in April, the Maryland State Board of Education appointed Dr. Carrie Wright as the next state superintendent of schools. Could you please speak to how her vision for the future and how her of education aligns with yours?
She's outstanding, and I was very, very excited when she said yes. You know, people might know her; she's a native Marylander, but also she is responsible for what everyone now knows as the Mississippi Miracle, when she was able to bring one of the lowest performing education systems into the top performing education system in the country. And she did it by doing something called focusing on the science of reading, making sure that we can get young people the basics that they need at an early age, focusing on reading and writing and mathematics. And if you can give our young people the foundation of that, they will develop a passion for learning that will be undeniable and impossible to put out. And so I believe that there are core tenets that we've got to do with education. I know she feels the same. We've got to be able to start earlier. We've got to be able to, 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old. So you got to start earlier than what we're starting right now. You have to do a better job of creating career pathways for our educators and for our teachers, and making this the place that our top and our best and our most talented want to come and serve as educators, and incentivize them to do it. You have to focus on career technical education, because we have some of the best four-year colleges in America, something we're very proud of. But we are going to end the myth that every single one of our students must attend one of them in order to be economically successful. I'm a graduate of a two-year college. I wasn't a traditional student. And we have to make sure that every student understands how they can find their own genius. She believes in this. She has done this her entire life, and she is a fantastic leader to be leading our education system.
As you're well aware, I'm not only a newspaper owner, but significant broadcast owner. And we have technology to communicate on an individual or statewide basis during emergencies. And what fails is a phone and underground and wiring systems when there are tornadoes and earthquakes. And when you look at floods, when it hits, I look at what happened to our region when the earthquake hit, which is the first thing to go. And it allows our technology to oversee these emergencies, so someone like you can have direct access to the people quickly and save these lives.
Yeah, and it's something that's important. You think about our Department of Emergency Management, and I tell you, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was first coming on board, they said, you're going to spend a lot of time on all your cabinet secretaries and your agency heads. The ones you should spend the most amount of time on is folks like your emergency management systems. And they were right, because they said, who knows what could happen in those first weeks or those first months. If you just think about these past few months, we've had to deal with tornadoes, we've had to deal with storms, we've had to deal with flooding, we had to deal with the collapse of a key bridge. So these are things that when you are an executive, you just realize that's part of your job. And that's what you have to do. And when your phone rings in the middle of the night, it's never going to be good news. So having the ability for people to be able to communicate, having the ability to be able to communicate with your people and with the people of your state to assure a sense of calm and safety and security, it's imperative that you get that right.
Maryland, like many states, is really facing a migrant crisis. What measures are being taken to address the immediate needs of migrants arriving in your state?
No, we have local supports for people that are coming to the state of Maryland, and we know that our economy in many ways is the work of immigrants, and immigrants like my family, that it relies on immigrants and immigration. When you look at our economy, whether you're talking about Western Maryland or whether you're talking about the Eastern Shore and everywhere in between, we also know that we suffer the consequences of broken immigration policies that happen on a national level. And so there's a lot that our state is doing and our local jurisdictions are doing to be able to deal with this issue as our nation continues, frankly, on the federal side with Congress, continues to fail to come with a long-term solution. But we as a state and as local jurisdictions do have a responsibility to be able to take care of those as they come here. But that's why we need a federal system that actually works.
How is your administration coordinating, let's say, with local governments and nonprofits to provide support and service to these migrants?
Well, we're thankful that so much of the social service backbone of our state are these nonprofit organizations, the ones who are providing shelter, the ones who are providing food, the ones who are providing comfort, the ones who are providing job training for people to be able to enter into a workforce. And ironically then, when you have a situation where someone then gets a job, they're then paying into a tax system, even though in some cases are not receiving any benefits from the tax system that they are paying into. And so there is a well-trodden integration that takes place between state government, local government, nonprofit organizations to be able to deal with and support people as they come to the state of Maryland. We also know that we need a sustainable immigration system. We are calling for it, we are demanding it, because states do not have either the resources or, frankly, the legal jurisdiction to be able to take on these issues by ourselves.
You know, one of the things I must tell you that many people admire about you is your unapologetic faith in God,
Yes.
moral striving, and standing the importance of family.
Yeah.
That is still important for the survival of our nation.
I know it's incredibly important for my personal survival. You know, I am unapologetically a child of God. I know who woke me up this morning. I know who's going to put me to bed tonight. I know who watches over me. I know who provides me my protection. I know who's providing protection for my family. It's something that I know is deeply ingrained in me because I'm the grandson of a minister. I'm the great-grandson of a minister. And I said, my whole family, I come from preachers and teachers. That's my family's background. And so I know how important it is for that basic foundation and fabric. And it's something that I believe in deeply, and something that I hold, that me and my family, we are a praying family, and we hold deeply to that.
You know, former Governor Hogan recently made comments regarding the state budget. How do you respond to his critiques, and what are your administration's priorities for the current budget cycle?
Well, I didn't hear what the old governor said. I've been busy.
Then we'll move on.
No, but I was too busy trying to get this economy going, because the truth is that part of the thing that we have to work on is we saw no measurements of economic growth over an 8-year period, but we saw budgets bloat. So we saw budgets continue. We saw people willing to spend, but no economic growth to be able to sustain it. And the money that came in from the federal government, the billions of dollars that came in from the federal government from COVID, that doesn't count, because that's one-time money. Most of it already given away and earmarked by the time we showed up. But that wasn't a budget growth. That was one-time capital growth. And so that's part of the reason that we had to come in and say, we have got to be able to have controlled spending. We've got to focus on economic growth. We've got to invest in industries that Maryland has a unique advantage on. We have to make sure we're getting people into the workforce and invest in getting people back into the workforce, because the only way we're going to get our economy going is to grow.
So finally, in about a minute and a half that we have left, what is it going to take for President Biden to survive?
I think President Biden is going to have to do what he's doing today and what he's doing yesterday, which is going out and talking to the American people. He's got to make his case. The way that you win elections is you go earn it every single day. You go into communities that might not have historically voted for you. You go into communities that you might have had their vote before, but you know you still need to get it again. You go and make your case. And if the president goes and makes his case, both on the record that he's had over the past 3.5 years, but also importantly, his vision. People vote on the future. They don't vote on the past. You got to make your case on the vision for the future. If he does that, the president will be successful in November, and he's going to have me and a whole legion of others out there helping to support him in that case as well.
Governor Westmore, it has really been a pleasure having you as a guest in our broadcast house tonight. Thank you so much for your joining us, and thank you for your leadership.
God bless you.
And thank you for joining us. Good night.